The famous American journalist Thomas Friedman began one of his articles published a few days ago with the joke that might be a bit old. However, it is timely and humorous. The joke, once popular among workers fearing machines would take over their jobs. And the joke goes like this: modern factories will not have workers at all, relying almost entirely on machines, except for one worker and a dog. The worker's job to feed the dog, and the dog's job to prevent the worker from touching any of the machines. Here, Friedman highlights that this joke has turned from humor to reality in China, where the so-called dark factories operate without human workers. But the question here is, what are the dark factories, and what is the story behind the new Sputnik moment that Friedman refers to in his article? And the last question, how could America one day become like Cuba? These are the main three questions that we're going to discuss today. According to a CNN report and what Friedman himself confirmed in his article, Trump has been trending on the Chinese social media with a new nickname called Chuan Jiangu, which means Trump is the builder of the Chinese nation. This, of course, seems contradictory. How could the same leader who imposed the harshest sanctions on China's history during his first presidency to be labeled as the builder of China? Thomas Friedman offers a clear answer to this question. Trump's trade war, marked by heavy tariffs and sanctions on Chinese giants like Huawei, acted as a wake-up call or a Sputnik moment for China. But what exactly does the Sputnik moment mean, and why is it so significant? It was mentioned in the article 3 times. To understand this, let's rewind to 1957. At that time, the Soviet Union shocked the world by launching Sputnik, which is the first artificial satellite in history. While the satellite itself was groundbreaking, the alarm came from the rocket that carried it, a missile capable of traveling for thousands of miles and potentially can strike any Western country, including the United States. If you remember, at that time, the Soviet Union was already a nuclear superpower. This technological leap posed a direct and existential threat to the United States. The American response was swift and strategic. President Eisenhower held urgent meetings, and the result is, by the following year, NASA was established to compete with the Soviet advancements. This moment provided the spark for the space race. It also led to America's eventually moon landing and the breakthroughs in missile technology. But the main point here is the United States treated the Sputnik moment as a challenge. They resolved to outperform the Soviet Union within a decade. Fast forward to Trump's presidency, his aggressive sanctions and tariffs forced China to reassess its dependence on the American technology. This for sure similar to how the US responded to the Sputnik era. For China, this became their Sputnik moment. It was a turning point that pushed them to focus on self-reliance and innovation. To achieve that, China rapidly accelerated the advancements in many sectors, including AI, robotics, electric vehicles, rockets, and automation. This whole effort led to the widespread adoption of dark factories, fully automated production facilities, not only in the car manufacturing sector like in the United States, but in many other sectors. And that's why in the last couple days, Trump was trending on the Chinese social media. It is because of this shift. Friedman mentioned another critical point in his article. The American officials are either unaware or fail to grasp the full extent of China's advancement today. And this is the primary reason why Thomas Friedman decided to visit China himself. During his trip, he met with workers, factory owners, journalists specialized in key sectors like electric vehicles, Chinese officials, and even foreign representatives. His goal was clear: to study China's progress and compare it with the United States with a concrete data. He says that the American officials must visit China to see its progress firsthand. And that is because the last visit from member of Congress was in 2023, and the visit before that was in 2019. This means in the past 5 years, there have been only 2 visits. Not only that, the ignorance of China's reality today will deepen in the next 10 years. To understand this, let's look at 2 numbers. First, the number of Chinese students currently studying in the United States exceeds 270,000 students. That is more than 250,000 students studying and conducting research across all fields, from semiconductors to satellites, artificial intelligence, and computer manufacturing. Just imagine if 20% of these students return back to China. That would mean 50,000 highly educated individuals contributing their expertise to China's technological and industrial landscape. On the other hand, 1,100 American students are studying in China. Just imagine the two numbers. More than 270,000 Chinese students are studying in the United States, while America has only 1,100 students are studying in China. And here, Thomas Friedman poses a critical question. How can America understand and learn from China and gain their expertise as they do from the United States when America has only 1,000 students in China? And how many future officials America will gain from this small number? Anyway, Friedman in his article conducted a comparison between China today and the United States. He provided some eye-opening statistics starting with the global industrial production. In the year 2000, most of the global industrial production came from the United States, its allies in Europe and Asia, and Latin American countries like Brazil. At that time, China contributed only 6% of the global industrial production. Fast forward to today, the story is entirely different. Based on the current manufacturing trends, by 2030, China alone is projected to produce more than 45% of the global industrial production. Today, China has already reached more than 31%. But Friedman says it is moving towards producing half of the world's production. And I need you to imagine this. One country is producing as much as 200 other countries combined. How this is even possible? When you talk about the United States and its allies, you are talking about the United States itself, a country like Canada, 27 countries in Europe, some countries in Asia like Japan, South Korea, Australia. So how can only one country produce more than these powerhouses countries? In all human history, there have been only two examples for this. The first was during the Industrial Revolution. The Great Britain became the world's industrial leader at that time. The second was in the aftermath of the Second World War. The United States emerged as the new global superpower. Anyway, let's go back again to Friedman's insights. After discussing China's dominance of the global production, Friedman shifts his focus to a specific sectors, starting with the banking and financial sector. In 2019, the total lendings by the Chinese bank was $83 billion. Fast forward to 2023, that number had skyrocketed to $670 billion. Now, think about this for a moment. Going from 83 billions to 670 billions in just a few years. That is an 8-fold increase. And now you might ask, what is the big deal here? How does lending help? Well, people usually borrow money from banks to open factories or make investments. Anyway, Friedman himself references 2019 again. And the reason for that is some of the members of Congress visited China in that year, including Thomas Friedman himself. And he wants to clarify that the China that you saw in 2019 is not China today. China today is totally different. Anyway, during his trip in 2019, he observed two main companies in China, Xiaomi and Huawei. These two companies were primarily manufacturing smartphones. Manufacturing smartphones was not particularly alarming, as many global players like Samsung in South Korea was also producing smartphones. But when Friedman returned to China recently, the landscape has totally changed. Xiaomi has become one of the world's largest companies producing the electric vehicles. Imagine a company like Xiaomi that wasn't known 10 years ago, transitioning from dominating the global phone production to dominating the electric vehicles market. And Xiaomi isn't alone. Huawei, which once made headlines for its dominance in telecommunications, has become one of the largest manufacturers of electric vehicle batteries. Additionally, the issue isn't just about the production. After all, the US produces its own electric vehicles. The real challenge lies in China's competitive edge. For example, the Chinese companies are producing electric cars starting at just $10,000. Yes, $10,000. This affordability, combined with quality, has allowed China to outpace not only the American companies, but also those from the Western allies. To put things into perspective, half of all car sales in China last year were electric vehicles, and most of them made by Chinese companies. China's dominance does not stop at manufacturing. The country has built an extensive EV infrastructure, or electric vehicles infrastructure. Charging stations for electric vehicles are now densely distributed across the country with a level of coverage unmatched with any other nation. And now let's compare Xiaomi with Apple, because both companies followed the same path. After spending 10 years attempting to enter the EV market, or the electric vehicles market, Apple recently abandoned the project and laid off its engineers. The main reason for that is the Chinese government supports companies operating in such sectors, while Trump, the new president, he will cut all support or subsidies for electric vehicles or companies that produce electric vehicles. Now let's shift our focus to another comparison. A comparison between two car manufacturers, China's BYD and America's General Motors. General Motors has faced a 5 billion losses of its value in the Chinese market in the past few years. Not only that, but in the last 11 months of this year, they experienced a 60% drop in sales, selling only 370,000 cars. On the other hand, BYD, or the Chinese company, sold 10 times the number that General Motors did. Thomas Friedman himself said, "When I was in China recently, I rode a BYD's electric car and I found that it is very comfortable. And of course, transportation costs are low because it runs on electricity." So if China continues supporting its EV sector while the US cuts subsidies and cuts the support, the consequences could be dire. And here is an example about Cuba. Cuba, under sanctions and economic hardship, has been unable to import new cars for decades. As a result, the company is stuck with old, outdated vehicles. Friedman warns, if the US fails to keep up with the advancements in EV sectors and also in autonomous vehicles, then the US risks a similar fate. A future where American cars are obsolete while the Chinese cars are progressive. Regarding the infrastructure in China, Friedman took one of the China's high-speed trains from Beijing to Shanghai, a distance roughly equivalent to traveling from New York to Chicago. Remarkably, this trip took 4 hours because the train was traveling at 200 miles per hour. Not only that, but almost there is 100 of them, 100 trains, going back and forth each day. And he points out a fascinating detail. If you place a coin on the window of the Chinese train during the journey, it will be there exactly as you left it. But if you try this in America, the coin will not stay for 2 seconds. Another thing is, Friedman talked to some businessmen in China. One of them called Eric Chen. Friedman asked him a straightforward question. What is the difference between China today and the United States? This well-known man said, "We develop and improve ourselves quickly. You, however, are excellent at starting from scratch. So you are good at moving from 0 to 1, but we can move from 1 to 100. And to be honest, I think this is a valid point. It's well-known today for anyone in America that Trump wants to penalize China by imposing tariffs. But Trump added a condition. If the Chinese companies move their factories from China to the United States, the tariffs would be lifted. On the surface, this seems like a win. Bringing factories from China to America could create jobs and also increase the domestic production. And this would make Trump a national hero. However, Thomas Friedman points out the real problem in this example: the dark factories. The factories that doesn't employ any workers. They operate entirely with robots to the extent that the lights in the factory are turned off because robots work without needing lighting. So even if these factories are to relocate from China to the US, they wouldn't create the kind of jobs people expect. Instead, the only employees might be one worker and a dog, the humorous scenario that we mentioned at the beginning as a joke. The worker feeds the dog and the dog ensures that the worker will not touch any of the machines. Now let me conclude by sharing Thomas Friedman's opinion from his visit to China. He says, right now we have a problem. You are focusing on sanctions to slow China's progress, but that alone won't yield a significant results. Sure, these are good steps and we will implement them, but they are not the real solution. The real solution is straightforward. We need to focus on improving ourselves. Just like China viewed Trump in his first presidency as their Sputnik moment, we need to recognize this moment as our Sputnik moment. This should be our challenge today, to create a Sputnik plan, to create a new plan to outperform China in the next 10 years, just like we did with the Soviet Unions in the 15s and 16s of the past century. And finally, I want to mention that Friedman, in his article, seems to be angry of Trump, and the reason for that is Elon Musk. In China, Elon Musk has seen as a role model. They are striving to produce more than one Elon Musk. They are competing among themselves to create giants like him. And what are we doing? Friedman says, we are targeting Musk, trying to pull him from engineering, car production, phones, rockets, and to do what? To make him a government official? How does this make sense? That is not his job. Get someone else for that. Let Musk stay in engineering and don't stop there. We don't need just one Elon Musk. We need dozens like him to lead the new Sputnik era. The last point that Friedman mentioned in the article is the Americans are distracted. On TV, they are preoccupied with social sciences, sports, gender debates, and transformations. But on the other hand, the Chinese are focusing on engineering, space, rockets, quantum computing, and electric vehicles. So if America doesn't take this challenge seriously, it will continue to fall behind the Chinese. The time to act is now. Let's treat this as the Sputnik moment. That is the end of this video, and thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.